just kind of on a whim, and ended up getting a sales job working for a brokerage firm / investment bank called Wertheim and Company, which doesn't exist anymore, but at the time was kind of the number 10 firm in that business. And so that was some good experience on, cold calling and sales and learning about financial markets and kind of demystifying the whole Wall Street thing for me. But it wasn't really for me. It was kind of a low satisfaction job. And I left after 3 years and traveled around the world for 6 months or so, and then showed up for business school at Stanford in 1987. And by this time, I was pretty sure I wanted to be some kind of an entrepreneur. And so I tailored my course selections there in that direction. And I got out of school. I didn't really try to get a job while I was in school, and decided I was going to move back more to my area of the country. So that was Atlanta, not quite moving home to Kentucky, but closer. And I got a job briefly doing some kind of venture capital-y things with a small firm here in Atlanta. And then I spent, about over a year without a job or any income, trying to either start a company or find a little company that I could buy. And I rounded up some investors who said they might be willing to invest if I came up with something good. And in the end, I joined somebody else's startup, a company called AudioFax. I started as the CFO, but pretty quickly became the CEO of this little company. And we raised a couple $1 million. We built a product, which this was sort of a pre-internet information retrieval thing using faxes, which none of you have probably touched in your life, but you would dial in with a phone to, get a fax document on demand. So companies could share their information that way. They could also broadcast it out. And so it was a bit of a thing at the time, obviously totally ridiculous and unnecessary in the world of internet. And that was a hard thing, right? We got a team up to 40-something people, built the product, put the product for sale. Not enough people bought the product. Had to fire about half the people. Couldn't pay our rent. We're really running out of money. And the founder was kind of a classic entrepreneurial personality, in some ways sort of difficult, especially for me, who was needing to always be the rational one. So I can tell you lesson number one, it's always more fun to be the wild, crazy entrepreneur guy than the guy who's supposed to keep the wild, crazy entrepreneur guy under control. I can promise you that's true. We did, maybe the most heroic thing I ever did in business was a software licensing deal that brought us $1 million and let us get current with everything and let the company continue. But eventually it clashed one too many times with the founder and decided I needed my own company. And I learned various lessons along the way. And the foremost one was to me that I really believe most people want to do a great job with their work. They're willing to work hard. They're willing to make sacrifices. And it's important to them. I also think that most people don't end up achieving that. And it's not so much their fault as it is the fault of the organizations where they're working. And so I went through this whole thought process of, the status quo in the world of business and organizational life in general is pretty bad, It's, most companies, it's not a very good experience to be the customer. It's not a very good experience to be an employee. And it's not because of some evil intentions that people have. It's kind of an insidious thing that creeps into organizational life. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to start a company, I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be different than that, better than that. How could I make that happen? And I ended up thinking that the only thing that really had a chance was the very philosophy of the company, or as I have expressed it, the core values and beliefs. And so after I left AudioFax, I wrote down the core values and beliefs that I wanted to have for my company, whatever it was going to do. And I actually put them on a poster, put them on the wall of my apartment, and there they sat, for months while I was trying to find, a company that wherein I could employ these core values and beliefs. And I was poking around in the world of information services. And one day I went to a conference in Washington, D.C., where someone was demonstrating the internet. This was 1993. None of you guys were born. And it was already pretty fantastic. You know, most people never heard of it. I'd heard of it because AudioFX was a Unix software company, and all our engineers were on the internet, and I knew that you could go on the internet and get jokes and print them out and put them on the company bulletin board, but I never really thought that I'd be using it. So I was kind of mind blown when I saw it. I mean, somebody was pointing and clicking just like I would do and getting up-to-date weather maps and information that otherwise just, you know, wasn't available to anybody. So I decided that that was it, because back in these days, everybody was thinking of, you're talking about the so-called information superhighway. That was the term everybody was using. And the big telecom companies like AT&T and Bell South at the time, and Comcast and others were talking about the information superhighway, which was going to be high-speed networks that would deliver their own private universe of information. And, you know, once I saw the internet, it was totally clear to me that those people were nuts, and that the internet was what they were talking about. That was the real information superhighway, and that there were loads of people just like me who would love to have access to the internet if only someone would deliver it to them in a way that they could use. And nobody was doing that. There were at the time thousands already of internet service providers. And but from the point of view of a point and click computer user, which is what I was, they were impossible. You weren't going to get anywhere. And so the story of how exactly I wound my way through that process of getting on the internet myself and deciding to become an internet service provider is one that I could go on for, you know, a long time about. And it's kind of a funny tale, but maybe we can get to that later. But for the moment, let's move on. So I started the company with my own money. I had some, like $150,000 that I had gotten in my departure from AudioFX. And one of the things I wanted to do was to start a company only using the money I had, because AudioFX, I had brought some investors in, and you know, I sort of felt trapped, because you know, I couldn't leave AudioFX until there was, you know, a good way out for them and their money, which, by the way, I did manage to make happen before I left the company. So I wanted to start with my own money. So if it didn't work, I could quit. You know, I could stop and go do something else. Because frankly, a lot of times that's the right answer. You know, you're not always working on something that deserves years and years and years of your hard work. You know, one of my other lessons that I would put forward is that sometimes quitting is underrated. You just have to know when you need to persevere and when you should go do something else. And honestly, as hard as AudioFX was, MindSpring was easy. We provided dial-up access to the internet, you know, starting quite early, and we did a much better job than our competitors, primarily because of the core values and beliefs of the company and what it was like to work there. You know, people love working at MindSpring, and we gave a lot of responsibility and a lot of respect to everybody working at the company. We always told the truth to the very best of our ability to the customers, to the employees, and it made an enormous difference. So MindSpring only existed for 6 years, from 94 to the year 2000. And during that time, we went from, you know, a tiny local company. By the end of 2004, we had 1,000 customers, to a regional company. By the end of 95, we had 10,000 customers, to a national company. By the next year, we had 130,000 customers, to one of the biggest internet service providers in the country, and pretty much by all accounts the best. I mean, every award that was out there for customer satisfaction and quality, we won it. You know, pretty much every time we ever were eligible to do so. And it was crazy. You know, we grew to, you know, 3,000 employees, you know, located in several different offices around the country. We went public really early on, in only 2 years after starting. And after, the stock got a little bit of a slow start, it went completely bonkers there through the late 90s. Our market cap at one point was up to $3 billion. And around Atlanta, we were a pretty big deal, I guess. Maybe not so much at the national level, but in Atlanta we were. And so it was a wild experience. I certainly never expected, to start a company that would grow so incredibly rapidly. And like I say, honestly, it was relatively easy. We more or less had one product, and we had insatiable market demand for it. Our challenge was just to scale it up without ruining everything. And that was hard. But hey, you're the worst problems that you can have. And I have experienced those as well. But the late 90s were an enormous bubble in the internet, as I'm sure you've heard. It's ancient history to you, but things just got overheated, and ideas that were not workable or financially viable were getting huge amounts of money thrown at them. And honestly, it all made no sense at all to me. And it was a tough environment for us because we were sort of this, very quickly became kind of a boring old school company that was making money. We charged $20 a month for our service. It was kind of old school, right? But it was a tough time. We felt like we needed to do something different other than just, keep doing what we're doing. And one day I was approached by the CEO of a big tech company that wanted to buy us, he said. And I'm thinking about, what the future looks like. And I am trying to live up to the market value that we already had. And, I had to be interested at least somewhat. And that ended up kind of starting a process that ended up with us merging with Earthlink, which was a company rather like ourselves, same business, same size, kind of our semi-identical twin from the West Coast. So the two companies combined. Headquarters was here in Atlanta. We kept the Earthlink name. I became the chairman, but not the CEO. And for me, that was not, I didn't have a job, really. Chairman sounds pretty impressive, but nobody reported to me. And I was having some pretty fundamental differences of opinion with the CEO and other people in the company about what we should be doing and how we should be doing it, what we should be doing in terms of strategy. We weren't going to be able to keep growing in the internet access business. We needed to shift to services we could provide over the internet. And by the way, all the exciting stuff was still yet to come. And also how we were doing it. The company was not living up to the core values and beliefs as well as it should be. So when I got a chance to begin selling stock, I very quickly, in another story that I could tell if you want, ended up selling all my stock and leaving the company and moving on to something new. So here I was, what is that? I'm roughly 40 years old. Suddenly wealthy, and I had to figure out what to do. And after a brief bit of soul searching, I decided to go back into business, but not the technology world this time. I decided to look for a business that would do something positive for the environment, because that's something I've always cared about. And pretty quickly, I was contacted by somebody who told me about walkable neighborhoods and walkable towns and new urbanism. And that question of the pattern in which how we build things, is it sort of normal, have to drive everywhere every time you do anything sprawl, or is it something else, a nice walkable town or neighborhood where you can have choices about how you get around? That topic just grabbed me. And so I almost right away found a couple of partners and started a company to be a developer in that business, and built a neighborhood called Glenwood Park in Atlanta starting in 2001. And that was great. The place is there, you can go see it. I think it's a really good example of sort of neighborhood scale new urbanism. But by, after a few years, my work there was mainly done, and I got the idea in my head to build a new town, a walkable, resort-oriented beach town in the tropics, partially as a frustrated consumer because I wanted to go to such a place and it didn't exist. And by the way, I was very much a frustrated consumer for internet service. And I think if you can be a frustrated consumer for the product that your new company is producing, I think that's a fantastic thing because it gives you all the right intuition. So anyway, starting in 2005, I began the search, which ended up being the thing that led to purchasing the land and starting the building of this town of Las Catalinas in Costa Rica. And Las Catalinas is now up to about 150 people, full-time residents, about 150 or so completed houses. It's a car-free town. And I think it has a lot of attributes to it which are really unique and from which I'm hoping other people will learn lessons. It's maybe the only significant car-free new town being built in the world, at least that I know of. And there's something really important and magical about that, I think, but that's maybe not the topic to dwell on for this group. It has not been as easy a battle, a process as MindSpring was. The world has thrown many obstacles to us in that process, including the financial collapse of 2008 and the COVID pandemic of 2020, both of which have been, as you can imagine, extremely disruptive for us. But this is not one where quitting is underrated. This is one where a lot of fortitude and resolve has been needed. And I think that brings me sort of to the end of my story and more or less the appointed time frame, and we can delve into more of any of that as you wish. I do think maybe the biggest lesson from my career has to do with this question of managing with values. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that and how you do it and why I think it works, if you want to. But I wanted to be an entrepreneur sort of since I was in college and certainly before I went to business school. So I've been in the shoes that maybe a lot of you all are in now, and I'm happy to talk about that part of things as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charles. Okay, so let's see. Yes. So into the next section, basically, Charles, I would love to kind of talk through some of your businesses more with you. I have a couple of questions myself, but I really want anybody in the audience to be able to ask questions about what they just heard or about what they've read about you before this. So if anybody would like to send a chat message, then I can read out their question, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Charles a question yourself, and we can get the conversation rolling. And if anybody doesn't have a question right now, then I would love to ask one of mine. In fact, I will, while people maybe think of some for themselves. So you were just talking about your core values, and I actually read through your core values, and they were very comprehensive, way more so than what I usually see other businesses, list on their motto or their their ethics page. So how did you develop those core values? Was it just something that you had developed over the course of your life before you started MindSpring? And have those core values changed at all throughout your businesses, or have you stuck to exactly what you came up with at first?
Great question. They're somewhat, they're very personal, right? I wrote them down, back in 1993 when I was thinking about, what's important to me in a company? What do I think would make a company, better than that sort of depressing status quo that I was seeing out there? And the key concepts are really respect for the individual and then honesty and integrity. I believe that the best way to get results in almost any organization is to give people a lot of respect and autonomy, and let them do things their way. And not everybody believes that. A lot of people think that the way to success is very tight micromanaging of exactly how people act, et cetera, et cetera. But when you do that, people can't really be themselves anymore. They have to sort of pretend to be somebody else. I mean, if you have to say always, "It is my pleasure, sir," when interacting with a customer or something like that, that's not who you are anymore. And the honesty and integrity thing is critical because in my experience, when something is going wrong in organizational life, 9 times out of 10, it has something to do with a lack of honesty. Somebody's not telling the truth. The employee is not telling the truth to his boss, or the boss isn't telling the truth to his employee, or the company's not telling the truth to their customers. And it festers from there. Some of the rest of these are kind of follow-ons from that. For example, the notion of making commitments with care and then living up to them is number 3 on the list. And it's kind of an outgrowth of honesty, but I thought it needed calling out on its own. And then there's the notion that being work's an important part of life, and it should be fun. Being a good business person does not mean being stuffy and boring. That one has turned out to be important. So what happened, and I think these have probably been most profound and visible at MindSpring, because we did grow so fast and there really wasn't any opportunity to do a lot of micromanaging. The values had to do a lot of managing for us, and they did. And so this one about being a good business person doesn't mean stuffy and boring. Oh my God, was that a relief to people? And we ended up attracting at MindSpring people who didn't fit in regular corporate or other organizations of the time, because it just wasn't them. Maybe they were gay, or maybe they had blue hair, or maybe they were just somebody whose normal presentation to the world didn't fit in some other way in the organizations of the time. And at MindSpring, all that stuff was okay. You can be who you are, and those people who, the less well you fit in sort of the typical organization of the time, I think maybe the more passionate you tended to become about a MindSpring as a place to work. And so it was fantastic. And have they remained the same? Not totally. When we merged with Earthlink, we added one new core value and belief, which I regretted almost immediately. It was something about, that we liked or valued competition and thought it made us better. And, as soon as I left, we've gone back to the original ones, and we've kept it that way. So it's incredibly powerful, and just this notion of being real with customers and people. The early days of MindSpring, I began doing something which I've continued doing ever since, which is writing letters to the customers, whoever they might be, about what's going on in the company. And at MindSpring, those letters were often about, here are the things that we did wrong last month, because things were going wrong. We had problems with the network. We wouldn't be able to get all the phone lines that we wanted. And, by just saying those things in a straightforward, sort of normal human way, which is shocking to people who are used to hearing this, corporate speak kind of thing that never quite tells the story very accurately or completely. So, one more thing I should say about the core values and beliefs. If you want to pursue this values-driven approach to organizational life, which I highly recommend, it is not hard to do. there are really just three things you need to do. You need to, well, there are four. First, you need to make sure that the values that you come up with are legitimate, they're authentic, they are you, or at least what you aspire to be, and it's something you're at least reasonably good at living up to. And then beyond that, you just have to talk about them or articulate them. You have to talk about them, you have to write about them, you have to sing about them, you have to make them a normal part of organizational life so they're absolutely top of mind for everybody. And when something comes up, the answer to a conundrum about a difficult situation will be naturally discussed in the context of the values. Two, you have to pick people that fit. That's not so hard. If you just ask them, people basically tell you. And if they're not telling the truth, you'll be able to tell. And you have to make sure that the people who are in leadership roles in the company are good examples of the values. You can't have somebody who's a liar, in a company whose number one core value belief is about honesty and integrity. And then when you allow that to happen, no matter how good that person might be at something else, they just got to go. You can't have them. Otherwise, they're not real or authentic anymore. So articulate them, pick the right people. And the third thing maybe is harder, but is to find ways that the organizational structures of the company can support the values. It's the least important of the three, and is maybe the trickiest, but it's things like if you have the MindSpring core value belief of respect of the individual and you're giving people a lot of autonomy, then a super detailed expense report review process where you have to justify every little decision you made, it doesn't fit with that. It undermines that. And a different policy might reinforce it instead. And honestly, that's about all there is to it, but it is hard for a lot of people to lead with values because they feel silly when they're doing it. They feel silly talking about the values that much. They feel like they're not being, the hard-nosed businessman that somebody told them they needed to be at some point in their life. And that's really the only thing hard about it. And it can be incredibly powerful. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. Awesome. So just a quick thought before I move on to the next audience question that I had. When you start an organization, or say a new person joins one of your organizations, did you find it successful to, give them those values in an employee handbook or something? Or did you more just live by those values yourself and, like you were saying, do everything in the company by those values, and they would kind of pick up on them and get the gist?
Oh, no, it's a super important part of the hiring process for sure. And then, not just lived, but, talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember, because with our values, there's some people you tell those 10 core values and beliefs. Some people think, oh my God, this guy's this ridiculous Boy Scout. He's never going to get ahead in the world where you need to lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead. And that comes out. You ask somebody, what do you think of these values? But other people will say, oh my God, I have been looking for a company like that my whole life. Mm-hmm. I'll take any job that you have. You don't even have to pay me. There were a lot of people like that too. So that's one of the key points is in the hiring process to make it really front and center.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay, so we have a question from Liam here. He asks, had you or anyone in the internet industry anticipated the .com bubble before it happened? Because I remember you were talking about that earlier on with MindSpring.
Sorry, sorry, I was getting distracted. Oh, there it is. I see it now. Have any industry anticipated? Oh God, yes. I remember going to a conference in, when was the peak of the bubble? Early 2000. So it's probably just a few months before that. And they had one of these things where everybody had a little device and you could answer questions that the guy on stage was asking. And one of the questions is, do you think technology companies are currently overvalued? And it was like 95% of people said, yes, absolutely, yes. I mean, to me, it was just insane. I mean, obviously, there were other people that disagreed that managed to keep those stock prices where they were for as long as they did. But there were certainly a lot of us who thought it was nuts, even while it was happening. Now, have I always been right about my stock market prediction since then? Absolutely not. But that time I was.
I think we all fall into that category. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then next, we have a question from Bob, which he sent to me. With your experience in technology and your interest in the environment, especially new urbanism and living and being able to walk and car free and whatnot, have you thought of any way to combine those two, or do you combine those two in what you do right now?
Well, it's an interesting question. It certainly hasn't been my main focus. There are, Google, through a company called, I think, Sidewalk Labs, has talked about that. And I know that they had a big project in the works in Toronto, but I'm not sure that's actually happening.
I remember they were partnering with Google on something.
What's
Uh,
that?
They were partnering with Google on something. I remember it in Canada. Yeah.
I think it's a part of Google even. Well,
Oh,
but anyway, it has not been a main focus for me. I mean, we do use in Las Catalinas, some basic technology tools to help people connect and carry on conversations when they're far away from each other. But it's, for whatever reason, that is certainly not the main interest for me. What I'm craving is the actual in-person experience that those kind of places can provide. And although I started with the environmental interest being front and center, pretty quickly the social implications and the human health and well-being implications of this choice of the pattern in which we build things became even more important to me. And I do think that the normal drive everywhere kind of existence is inherently very isolating and even unhealthy, and certainly not something that I personally find all that satisfying or enjoyable. And the car-free existence in an active little community like like Las Catalinas is pretty much the opposite. And when you come out of your door into a beautiful pedestrian environment with friends and acquaintances around it, you just relate to the world in a whole different way. I think for a lot of people like me who went to a small, completely pedestrian college, that's the only time in most people's life where they ever get to experience that kind of thing, where your friends are really just right there, close at hand, and you're constantly having these unplanned encounters leading to pleasant human interaction. But I think a lot of that is not just something special about college. It has to do with the pattern, the way we build things. So I strayed from the question, but no, the technology stuff has not been front and center for me.
that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so then I remember you were talking about, how being able to move on and, quit from something that's not working is very underrated. But then you've also talked about how resilience has been really important with Las Catalinas. So we have a question from Jack, and he's asking basically, how do you balance that line? How do you know to keep going or to quit?
So it's a great question and a super important decision that you have to make sometimes. And I certainly don't have a snappy answer to it, but I will say this, a lot of us have had beaten into our heads this notion that winners never quit and quitters never win, and that you just can't quit. But the truth is that sometimes you're just fighting the wrong battle, and there's only so much time that you have in life. And this isn't just in, a question of when you started a company, but if you're just in a job, say, that is where your things are not going as they should be, and you're giving it your all, but you feel like you're blocked at every turn. Sometimes quitting can be an incredibly liberating experience. At Audio Effects, it was for me. I had been in the pressure cooker there. I had been in a difficult situation. You work in a company that wasn't mine. I wasn't the founder. I wasn't a major shareholder. I was having difficult conflicts with the person that was all of those things. And finally one day he just said, one thing too many to me, and I literally cursed at him, slammed the door, and walked out. And of course I came back to retrieve my belongings, make an orderly retreat, but it was the feeling of liberation and the weight being lifted off of my shoulders and being able to move on to something else was just overwhelmingly great. And as it turns out, in my case, the next thing was fantastic. I could have stayed there and kept beating my head against the wall for who knows how many more years, but man, I'm so glad I didn't. So in that case, it was the right call. But it's, I think a lot of times it's not obvious. So all I would say really to guide you is don't feel like that if you do make the decision to quit, that somehow that's just what losers do. Because that's just not true.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely a personal decision, I guess, just weighing both sides and whether it's time to move on or not. Awesome. Okay. So Liam has another question. Talking about MindSpring. Personal privacy and security is a common issue with many internet companies today. And he's wondering what that was like back then and how you dealt with it.
Well, we did have to deal with those kind of things. Actually, the biggest one back then was probably spam. The internet was new, and spam was a huge problem. There weren't people weren't doing things on social media the way they are now. People weren't routinely revealing personal secrets on the internet. So security in terms of keeping our own network secure was obviously super important. And I guess we're fortunate we never really had a major issue with that, because certainly never a battle you can win in any permanent way. And so if our security was intact, then the privacy of people's emails and so forth that we were hosting were good as well. So those things weren't sort of front and center issues, but what terms of use kind of things, like in particular, spam was an evolving science at the time. And customers that were just doing things they shouldn't be doing and that we needed to terminate. Those were more the kind of issues we were facing back then. And so, we were actually, I guess, kind of on the forefront of working out answers to some of that stuff.
That makes sense. Yeah. And surely spam is still a big issue today, constantly evolving.
Yeah. In my case, it seems to have moved from my email to my telephone.
Yes. Okay. A question from Matt here. What is the most important lesson you've learned from a major mistake that you've made?
Let me think for a second on that. Well, the merger with Earthlink was a mistake. The original business plan for MindSpring was actually, pretty smart about realizing that the internet access build business was only going to last so long, and that we had to use that to transition to offering, some kind of information services over the internet. And but then we were caught up in, the incredible challenge of scaling up this business very quickly, and it was really, really hard to, put any significant resources or even mind share to those questions of new little information services that would have, comparatively speaking, no revenue. And it was hard to justify giving those things the attention, which in retrospect, they desperately needed, because all these valuable things that have come along on the internet either didn't exist at all or were brand new at the time. And Google was there by the end of MindSpring time. Facebook wasn't. Any other social networking stuff that has survived to this day wasn't. Internet telephony stuff like Skype and so forth wasn't. So there was a lot of great stuff. The most important stuff was really yet to come, and we failed ever to make that transition. And so once we had merged with Earthlink, I guess the die was kind of cast at that point. At least, because by that time I was sort of realizing, hey, we need to get on with it, and make this shift. But I couldn't make that happen anymore. So if we had continued on independent, which seemed impossible, right? We got this offer to acquire us that put us into what was called, probably still called, Revlon duties, based on some precedent. If someone has made an unsolicited offer to buy your public company, you have an obligation to go do a quote market test to see what your other alternatives were. So we did, and it turned up various other possibilities. Microsoft wanted us to merge with the Microsoft network. Prodigy wanted us to merge with them. And oh God, we almost sold the company for cash to Deutsche Telekom, which would have been the best outcome by far. But we sort of felt like we had to do something. All these other companies in the bubbly era were, for example, AOL, which I consider to have been really a fraudulent company, was, claiming all of this, quote, other revenue from things besides the subscriber $20 a month payment and your e-commerce, your advertising revenue. We had none of that. We didn't have a scale for that. And so we felt there was this imperative for scale so we could tap into these other revenue streams and all. But if we had just accepted the fact that our dial-up internet access business was only going to go so far, and then it was going to turn into as they call it in business school, a cash cow, kind of slow or no or even shrinking growth business, but throwing out a lot of cash. And we had millions of subscribers who thought we were absolutely great and were going to be receptive to any sort of new services that we offered. If we'd done that, who knows what we might have accomplished, but did not have the foresight or the ability to sort of step back from the demands of the moment and just dealing with the business that we already had and make that happen. And in our defense, I think that's an incredibly hard thing to do. It's an incredibly hard thing to do. But if we had managed to do that, the sky was the limit.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. I didn't know that there were, I mean, it makes sense that at that time there would have been a lot of possible avenues for an exit for MindSpring. But it's interesting that, you know, after you make the decision, that's just kind of how the history is written, and all of those other possibilities go out the window.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a question from Taze then, talking about the core values again, which are so important. This is a question about scaling those values. So the question is, how do you maintain those core values as the business scales? It's easy to be personal and authentic when the business is small, but as it grows, how do you maintain that sense of authenticity?
Great question. And actually a question that would come up a lot as we were growing. And there is an answer to it, a very definitive answer. The key is that the, the core value and belief leaders need to be all over the company. You know, if it was just me and, you know, these are, you know, Charles's values and he reinforces them to the best of his ability and that's it. Then as we scale up, that all gets diluted down to almost nothing. But if there's a whole army out of people there that are, you know, major advocates of and practitioners of, the core values and beliefs and using them to lead the company, then it scales up effortlessly because, you know, the bigger you get, the more of those people you have. And that really worked at MindSpring. I'll tell one story. At one point in our growth, we took over the individual customers from a company called PSINet, who is one of the big early ISPs. And their customer support center was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It was big by our standards. I think it was, you know, as big as what we already had, more or less. And it was awful. It was awful. It was a hellhole. You know, people working there hated it. You know, we sent, you know, people up to, you know, kind of do our due diligence. And somebody was talking to one of the leaders there. And, you know, while he was talking to our person, he would periodically pick up the phone and then just hang it up. Our person said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, you know, it's all about quantity. If I don't keep up my quantity, you know, I'm in trouble. So he would literally be picking up the phone and just hanging up because he had to do it to make his numbers. And then the place was a hellhole. And so we showed up, we sent one guy up there, a guy named Chris Miller, who was a great core value and belief leader. And we put in place not much besides just a new philosophy. And almost overnight, the place turned around like you couldn't believe. And in fact, we had a lot of numbers we gathered to, not just about quantity, but about quality too. And before long, the quality numbers out of Harrisburg were better than the ones in Atlanta, which was a significant point of making the people in Atlanta rather angry. So there was nothing wrong with those people. You know, they were good people, like most people are good people that wanted to do good work and provide good service and do all the things that make you proud at the end of the day when you go home. But the system that they were laboring in was just built wrong, had the wrong values.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible that it shifted so quickly in Harrisonburg. And that was with, I mean, that was the same staff that after those changes were made, they just.
Same people, same facility, same equipment.
Just the values.
Different result.
Yeah, that's incredible. Before I ask another question, I just wanted to announce that Layla is going to post the attendance form, the link in the chat. So if anybody needs to click on that for attendance, that's where it will be. Okay. So then moving on. A question from Trahana. Sorry if I mispronounced that. The question is, what major changes did you make to your company? I believe this is talking about MindSpring during its 6 years, and why? Did your business plan work for you from the start, or what adjustments were made?
The business plan did work. Uh, you probably, the biggest shift in gears is when I brought in some outside investors who were great. Hamlin and Bill Scott and company from ITC Holding Company here in Georgia. And so up to that point, we'd been, very what's the road word, sort of grassroots, up by the bootstraps. And with that money, there were some things that they knew we needed to do, which I probably wouldn't have done soon enough. Like spend a bigger hunk of money to build a real billing system that could scale up. And that turned out to be an incredible advantage for us that most ISPs just never got, and became huge, debacles for them. We hired a real CFO, earlier than I probably otherwise would have, which turned out to be totally necessary. So, from their previous experience, they knew what some of the challenges of scaling up a, what was basically a telecom service provider company were going to be. And so, thank goodness I found those guys, and thank goodness they really had that experience in a similar, kind of business, and knew to, I don't want to say insist, but let's say strongly encourage to, get some of those things in place. But no, weirdly enough, the business plan did work as anticipated. And what we failed to do was to make that turn into the information services, as I discussed a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm. Were you, just following up on that myself, were you surprised throughout that process that you had nailed the business plan so well at the beginning, basically? Were you anticipating changes, or were you pretty confident going in on the model?
Yeah, because my previous experience had not gone so easily, right? And some of my subsequent experiences haven't gone so easily as well. But that's one time where it was the right thing at the right time. And I was surprised. I guess I sort of did, on the one hand, think that yes, the internet was going to be this, amazing, incredibly fast growing thing, but that our own company should be able to follow through with that so seamlessly was surprising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of going off of that. This is a question that I'm sure all of us are pretty interested in. Josh is asking, was there any moments through your journey, maybe right after you finished with college, where you were doubting your ability? I know that you didn't go straight into, the pure entrepreneurial ventures that you've launched, but what would you say to college graduates who are unsure of what steps they should take, specifically business graduates here in SOE?
Well, there are a lot of paths that can lead to great outcomes, and you think back to the decisions that you make in life, and it's just astounding how the consequences that come from what might have seemed like an inconsequential decision at the time. So it's not like there's one path forward. Was I ever sort of doubting myself? Yeah, not so much. I mean, on the one hand, no, but on another way, yes. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what the process I went through, not many people probably could have gone through, because in my late 20s, I had a significant period of time as I was a young, single guy in Atlanta, no job. I'd go out, meet people, and say, "What do you do?" And I would say, "Well, I'm kind of trying to buy a company or start a company or something like that." The answer was basically not much, And for a lot of people, that would be, just from an ego point of view, really, really hard to deal with. And that was a significant hunk of time for me there. But I know somehow for me that was okay, but I tell you, I don't think there are many people who would have really been okay with that. But in terms of doubting yourself, I think, all along the way, even very successful people, I'm not necessarily just talking about myself, but I would include myself in this, you know, find themselves in situations where they feel like they are totally out of their depth. Nobody is an expert at everything. And, if you're a small business person or entrepreneur, you find yourself constantly in situations where there's decisions to be made about topics that you just really don't know that much about. And I think a lot of us, sometimes feel like an imposter, or somebody who's how did I deserve to be here kind of thing. I think those are pretty common feelings, almost universal, even for people that end up in levels of high responsibility. So yeah, that kind of anxiety maybe never totally goes away, but I was blessed with a certain degree of immunity to peer pressure and need for status at the time of my life that enabled me to kind of experiment around and get through that period and find my path.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, okay, so we're getting pretty close to the official end of the meeting here, which is 6:30. So I'm not sure. I think I mentioned in the email earlier that you're welcome if you have time and students continue to have questions. I will keep the meeting going and you're welcome to answer. But if not, then we do really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us here.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Matt, for organizing. Thank you, David, for moderating so ably. And thank everybody for your questions. I wish you all the best of luck with your entrepreneurial ventures. It's not, it's not the only thing that leads to happiness and success in life. And in fact, it can be a rough path, but it can also work out well. So I wish you all the best of luck.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, I know that we didn't get to speak about it too much, but if anybody was interested in kind of the new urbanism that Charles is doing with Green Street Properties and now in Las Catalinas, I think you mentioned a great book I saw, Suburban Nation by Andres Duany.
That's the one that got me hooked.
Yeah.
It's now a 20-year-old book, but probably would be, do just as good a job. There's some basic, one of the things that's so appealing to me about this topic, so these basic principles that apply to making places that are pleasantly and successfully walkable. Things about architecture, things about density, things about mix of uses, and they make so much sense. And if you've never thought about it before, these things probably never occurred to you. They've never occurred to me. But once you're exposed to these things, they seem so intuitive and powerful, and I think that's what hooked me. So yes, I do recommend that book strongly. There's an organization called the CNU, the Congress for the New Urbanism. That's sort of a clearinghouse, if you will, for information on the topic. And a lot of these notions have become a lot more mainstream in the 20 years since I started at it. Not much of anybody was doing anything but sort of normal suburban strip center and subdivision and garden apartments, back at that time. And of course, there's been a huge amount of development that's more in town or walkable town, walkable neighborhood stuff since then. So we've made a lot of progress in that regard. And to me, the next frontier is this car-free part. And I do think that in the future, probably we're not all going to be owning cars the way we are now. There will be these self-driving vehicles, and we probably won't even own them. We'll use them as a service. And so once you get to that point, giving up all the things you have to give up to have, cars right there on your street and living in your house, I think is going to seem less and less like the trade-off that people want to make. So I do think car-free neighborhoods have a bright future.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, with any luck, maybe we'll have Charles come even in the spring. Hoping to get him here to talk to our College of Environment and Design, and maybe if there's folks in this group who are interested in new urbanism, maybe can glom on to some of those talks as well. So fingers crossed. I know Charles is really busy and maybe in Costa Rica at any given day or week, but maybe we can work out time for you to come over in the next few months or sometime in the spring semester if everything goes well.
Yeah.
I'd be happy. By the way, I'm finally allowed back into Costa Rica as of the 15th of October. I haven't been able to go since March, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Awesome.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll have to come try to visit someday, Las Catalinas.
I hope so.
But yeah, thank you again so much, Charles. And thank you, Matt, for helping me set this up as well. I think this was super informative for me, at least. And I think everybody in the audience enjoyed it as well and had some great questions.
Thanks. And Layla, thanks for popping up there and giving a nod at the end.
Yes, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Yeah, thanks. My pleasure, guys. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for jumping on.
Hey, thanks, David. I thought you did a great job, and thanks for all the effort that went into doing this. I think that was, from my standpoint, it went great. So thanks.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I really wanted to, and I enjoyed talking to him. So I do. Yeah. If he comes back again, I'll look out for that next semester.
Yeah, initially, we tied that into this event too, like he was going to come during the day and speak to some entrepreneurship classes and some environment design folks and so forth and so on. But most of environment design stuff got kicked to the spring or kind of virtual. And so we just decided to see if he could come then. So so hopefully he will, and hopefully still maybe swing by some entrepreneurship classes and speak to some folks there too. Because I'm sure there are a lot of people who might have wanted to come and to this and couldn't today. So
awesome. Yeah. No, that would be great.
right.
We'll just look into that next semester, I guess.
Yeah, thanks so much. I can reach out to you or Christina or whoever,
Definitely.
just to let you know about that kind of stuff.
That would be great. Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Matt.
Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.